Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the 10-minute Bible lesson. We appreciate you joining us today. Listen, we've been looking at the children of Israel, how they were delivered out of Egypt, and how now they have been brought into the desert. They've been delivered for 3 weeks. They've been traveling 3 weeks in the desert, and they come to this place, which is an important place. It's called Rephidim. Now, Rephidim was close to Mount Sinai. Now, Mount Sinai is a really significant place. It's not the children of Israel's final destination. Their final destination is the Promised Land. But when they get to Mount Sinai, they stay for a whole year. And the reason they do, they build the tabernacle in all of its furnishing. They get instructions from God, and God gives them His law and the 10 Commandments. So this place, Rephidim, is fairly close to Mount Sinai. Now, there are 3 things that happened while the children of Israel were at Mount Sinai. Now, one of the things that happened was that it's where God got water from a rock. The second thing was where God gave them victory over an enemy. And the third thing that happened while they were there, God gave Moses great advice through his father-in-law. So the first thing was, you can just think about it, that they had come to this place and there was no water. Imagine that there's no water in the desert. But what did the children of Israel do? They did what they do so well. They griped and they complained and they contended with Moses. I feel sorry for Moses. Don't be a griper. Don't be a complainer. Listen, it won't go well with us. And listen, not only that, I've done enough griping and complaining that no one else anywhere needs to do anymore. I don't want to be a griper and a complainer anymore. But that's the way the children of Israel, that's the way they were. Let's look in Exodus chapter 17, verse 2. Therefore the people contended with Moses and said, "Give us water that we may drink." It almost sounds like they're demanding water from Moses. "Give us water that we may drink." So Moses said to them, "Why do you contend with me?" Did you know that Moses, the Bible says, was the most meek man in all the earth? To me, that just amazes me that he was such a humble guy. And he had this gigantic task of leading the people into the Promised Land. So he said, "Why do you contend with me? Why do you tempt the Lord?" Poor Moses, I have to say. So he said to God, he says, "What shall I do? These people, they're ready to stone me." And God says, "This is what I want you to do. I want you to take the elders and go over here to this rock and hit this rock." And he did so, and water came out. Now, it didn't trickle out. I don't think it did. I think it gushed out. This water did. And when I think of that, there's something that just, to me, it's an amazing thing. It would be an amazing thing if God provided water in the desert. That would be an amazing thing. But it's how God provided it. He got water out of a rock. And to me, it just boggles my mind. Now, no one thinks of the things that God thinks of. Nobody does that. Listen, when they were escaping from the Egyptians, nobody was thinking that their escape route was going to be that God was going to divide the sea. And no one was thinking, listen, no one said in this group, I wonder if God's going to strike the rock and bring water out of it. Listen, nobody was thinking that. Nobody was saying that, and it makes it an amazing thing. So that's the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened was that while they were at Rephidim, their enemies attacked them. That is to say, it was the Amalekites came and attacked them, and made war against them. And so Moses did something. He picked someone to lead the army of Israel in battle. Do you know who that was? Who do you think it was? Listen, it was a guy named Joshua. In fact, Moses said to Joshua, you do this, and I'll do this. So let's read about it in Exodus 17, verse 9. And Moses said to Joshua, choose us some men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. Now, Moses went up there, and as long as he held the rod up in the air, what do you think happened? The Israelites were winning. They were winning the battle. But as soon as he let down his hands, the Amalekites, they were winning. And so Moses, you might ask this question, why in the world did Moses lower his hands? And the Bible says that his hands and arms got heavy. That's right, it was heavy. But thank the Lord, Moses had a brother. Do you remember his brother's name? His brother's name was Aaron. And he also had this other fella whose name was Hur, H-U-R. And so Aaron and Hur did something for Moses. They came up there on the hill and put a rock under Moses and let him sit down on it. And then one on Moses' right and one on Moses' left grabbed his hand and held his hands up in the air. And you know what? The Bible says that they got a victory that day. In fact, they did that. The Bible says they defeated them, and they held his hands up until the sun went down. Now imagine that. Now listen, it's okay. There's a couple of things that I see in here that are something that we ought to think about. One of them, it's okay to have someone help us. Even Moses needed help. And so we have tasks sometimes that are just too great for us, and there's nothing wrong with having someone hold us up. And so that's what Aaron and Hur did. And another thing I think is important about this passage is that the children of Israel, they looked up there at Moses and they looked at that rod, and it gave them courage because they knew that was the rod of God and it represented the power of God. In other words, they had faith in the power of God. And that's something that all of us had to do. And you know something else? After they won the victory, they worshiped the Lord. Now, how in the world did they worship the Lord? They did it by building an altar to the Lord. Let's read about it in Exodus chapter 17, verse 15. And Moses built an altar and called its name, "The Lord is my banner." To me, I'm thinking that that banner was a banner of victory. You and I have the victory when the Lord is on our side. He is our banner. He's our banner of victory. Now, after this, Moses' father-in-law, do you remember him? He came to visit Moses in the camp. And he brought Moses' wife and his children to him. Now, when Moses was in Egypt, he had sent his wife and children back to his father-in-law. So Jethro, he arrives there in camp, and that's when the third thing happens that's really important at Rephidim. That's when Moses gets some great advice from his father-in-law. Now, before he gets this advice, the children of Israel celebrate the coming of Jethro. They have a great feast and a celebration, and it really makes an impact upon his father-in-law, Jethro. In fact, Moses, he conveys all of the things that God has done for his people. And listen, it was you need to read about that and see how it really impressed Jethro. Now, after that happened, let's read in Exodus 18:13. 18:13. And so it was on the next day that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. So Moses' father-in-law is watching all of this. And here's what he says in verse 14 of Exodus 18. So when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did for the people, he said, "What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit and all the people stand before you from the morning till the evening. And you know what Moses said? Moses said, well, listen, they come to me to make inquiry about God and about the things of God. So Moses' father-in-law tells him, this thing that you're doing, Moses, is not good. That is to say, the way that he was doing it was not good. In fact, he says, you're going to wear this people out, and this thing is just too great for you. And here's the advice that he gave him. He says, you need some help. He says, you need to choose out some certain people that you can let do some of the things that you're doing. But listen, he gave him qualifications. He said, make sure these men are men who fear God. Isn't that a good advice? And not only that, he says, make sure these men are men of truth. And they're not covetous men. That is to say, they're not greedy for gain. And he says, when you get them, put some over 1,000, some over 100, some over 50, some over 10, and let them judge matters that are smaller. And then the great matters, they can bring to you, Moses. So that was the third thing that happened at Rephidim. Well, listen, I think this is really an interesting story. And next time, we're going to see where the children of Israel go ahead and make it to the mountain of God, Mount Sinai. But until then, you're just going to have to wait. But I want you to join us next time. And until then, I hope you have a really good week.